Today's lecture is about selecting options, and it's also about the start of implementation, which we will find right here, but I'll get back to that one because I need to elaborate a little bit on how we approach the implementation process. But today, we will look at these options that we generated last time, and we'll try to take a closer look at how do we select between these different options that we have. Now, when we are looking at the options, then we remember that we had market-based and we have resource-based options. And just to make a recap of that, I've kind of listed the options here. As you can recognize, we have a broad target with course leadership, that's one option. We have a broad target with differentiation, that's another one. And we have the rest of the market-based options down here. Over here, we have our resource-based options. We could talk about upstream, downstream, competences, etc. So based on our external analysis, we developed these, and based on our resources, we developed these. And when we are looking at these options and how to choose between them, then the whole process about how to kind of deal with options and how to make sure what options to choose from and kind of end up implement. We have this idea about having criteria, we have procedures and techniques, and we have application of empirical evidence and different kinds of guidelines. Now, of course, the procedures and techniques and that I guess is pretty okay to read by yourself, and it's not that difficult to understand that we have different procedures, we have different techniques, and also you are quite familiar with the application of evidence and that we use specific guidelines when we are going to figure out what kind of strategy are we going to apply and what is the content of that strategy. So in this lecture, I would rather focus on these specific criteria that we have. So that would be our focus for this little lecture here. And I'm not going to go through all the different kinds of criteria, but I'll try to focus on two specific ones, namely cash flow and break even. But before we get to those very specific different ways of looking into an option, I would also like to introduce you to the overall idea about what criteria in general should an option live up to in order for us to choose. Okay. These criteria that you can see here, we have consistency, suitability, validity, feasibility, business risk, and attractiveness to stakeholders. These are criteria that we need to go through, and we simply need to imagine that we are evaluating each of our different options up against these criteria. Okay, let us try to, we'll get back to these, the more specific content here, but let's try to look at it in this way. And I'll put the criteria over here to the right, and note that we have our options, and they need to be checked up against the 6 criteria, basically all of the 6 criteria. So if we get back and pick up our market-based options, we have those here, and then we could take one example. Okay, we have developed different options. We may have an option called market development, and we have a market development option because we have seen in our external analysis that there might be openings in a specific market for developing ourselves into a new market. So that is an option that we have, and this option then we need to check it up against these criteria. The first criteria is market development consistent with our purpose and our objectives in general. So that is kind of the first thing we need to ask ourselves. Does this option here, does it fit into the consistency with purpose and objectives? And of course, then you can easily count on suitability of that strategy. So market development, is that suitable for this environment that we are going into? So even though our research might show that, yes, it's a good option, but does it really suit into that particular environment? Also, what about the validity of the projections and the data that we have been used? Are they okay? Because if not, then we might have been based our decision on a wrong data set, and that's not, of course, the best thing. Then we would also have to check out this market development option if it's feasible with three main factors, namely internal constraints consisting of skills and finance. Simply means if we want to develop our sales into a new market, do we have the skills and the finance to do it? What about the external constraints? What about the competitors? If we want to go on with developing ourselves into a new market, is that even possible given the competitive situation? And if we want to do it, means that if we have the internal constraints, we have the skills, we have the finance, but do we also have the commitment of the organization and the people who's going to implement it? So that's also quite important when we're developing an option. The next point is about business risk, and we need to assess our business risk. And this is where we are going to take a closer look at it. And the last of the 6 criteria would be attractiveness. So is this market development option, is that attractive to our stakeholders? Could be investors, shareholders, etc. Do they find it a good option for us to pursue? There might be situations where certain powerful stakeholders think, this is not the best option. Then we should probably try to make sure that we follow options and choose options that powerful stakeholders find best. Now, these were market-based options, but as you remember, we also have resource-based options. And here we have upstream, downstream, and the same thing goes on quite in the same way. We simply evaluate, let's say, designing in cost reduction, if that's an option that we have found out through our analysis that we can basically use, apply, then we have to check it. Is that consistency with our purpose and objectives? Is it suitable? What about the validity of the data used? Is it feasible? What about the business risk and the attractiveness to stakeholders? So in this way, as you also know, we might have had different kinds of options. We could have, for example, a broad target with differentiation. At the same time, we could have market development, and we also have maybe a couple of here resource-based options. So putting it all together simply means that we analyze each of these options up against these criteria. And in that way, we get more insight into also how do these options play together, and does it make sense to execute on these options at the same time. So in order to proceed, our focus will be on business risk, and that means that I'm simply picking out only one of these 6 criteria, and let's try to take a closer look on these. So what does it mean that we now have business risk and we need to assess the business risk? Let's try to look into some of these issues here. Looking into the analysis of business risk. The first one, financial risk analysis. Here we find cash flow, and we find break even, And the reason that you have two of these arrows here is that these are the two that I'm going to talk more about in this lecture here. Part of financial risk analysis is also company borrowing requirements. Simply means how much money does the company need to borrow if they need to borrow something, and something about the financial ratio analysis. What about the investment? Can we get our money back, return on investment, etc.? Then another good idea in order to look into business risk is to look into sensitivity analysis. So it simply means, in this book of Lund at least, that we have an optimistic assessment and a pessimistic assessment. So it goes for trying to identify the best possible outcome for us as a company if we go with this particular option. Let's go back and pick out market development again. This market development situation, if we want to penetrate or go into a new market here, let's say that we are a Danish company, you want to go into the German market, then if everything goes as it should and maybe even better, then how much sales might we have in the German market? So trying to set out some kind of assessment of the most optimistic scenario that we can have us entering the German market. So, and in contrast to that, we should also try to figure out what is the worst possible thing that can happen. And that might be that we simply not sell anything and we completely fail. But we may also have situations where we can say, well, it's not necessarily that we don't sell anything, but we simply may not just be able to sell a lot. So what is the most optimistic assessment of what we might face, and what is the most pessimistic assessment? And then we would like to have some ideas about the consequences of that, given this more risk of the business in Germany in this particular case. Okay. Then we have here scenario projections. Could have a broader view of future developments. You could take more qualitative as well as quantitative views, and we could also have or be more or less concerned with the future and more with the contrasting views of what is actually going on. So, but all of this down to here, and also of course simulation and modeling, has to do with numbers, trying to figure out what is the risk and what are the economic consequences of us entering a specific market, in this case, Germany. So whenever we think about business risk, then try to think in terms of money and try to think in terms of what are the economic consequences of this particular option. Just like yourself, if you want to go on a vacation and you have different places you would like to go, then part of it could be to say, okay, is this vacation consistent with what I like and what I prefer, etc.? And do I have, for example, the right data at hand? Do I have the right brochures? Do I have the right information about the hotels, etc.? And then if all of this is true, and then the business risk for you will simply be, what are the economic consequences of choosing one of these options? Do I have enough money, or do I need to borrow money here in order to go on this vacation? So you could basically use these input as a way of analyzing risks of your own choices when you look at it in this way. Good. And that leads us to this one about the analysis of business risk overall, and specifically about cash flow and break-even. These are the two that I would like to introduce you to. Now, some of you might know them quite well because you have looked into it before, and some of you may never have heard about this before. So I'm trying to do it very slowly and trying to reach out to you who have not heard about this before and try to make it very simple and also maybe a little bit too simple, but enough input for you to understand the basic idea about cash flow and break even. And then you might say, why not some of the other issues down here from financial analysis? Well, basically because in companies today, they use cash flow quite a lot, and it is important for you to understand what cash flow is because it's mentioned many times in a company, and that's what they look at when they are looking into different options, not only strategic, but in lots of cases. Also when they are investing in a new assembly line or a new campaign or something. And then break even is also a concept that is used quite often in companies, and you simply have to know what it means when we talk about a break-even analysis in a strategic context. So these are the arguments for why cash flow and break-even and not the other different issues that we could deal with. Now, that being said, let's try to look into cash flow. First of all, cash is money, and money can flow simply means that it can change hands. And just for now, just think about you taking up some money from your pocket and you hold it in your hand, and then you give it to another person that you might have bought something from. That is about cash flow with you, because now money has left your pocket and money has gone into another person's pocket. So that means that you have now a negative cash flow and the other person has a positive cash flow. Now, if we take this little example into a company and still keeping it quite simple, then try to imagine that each company has a bucket standing in its accounting room. And in this bucket, we have to imagine that money can go into this bucket, and that is the same as receiving money, of course. And let's try to look at where do we get money from. Well, a company can receive money from customers. That's pretty obvious that we do get money from customers. But we could also go to the bank and we could take a new loan. So imagine a customer giving us money for a product that we have sold to the customer. That means money in. So we take the money and putting them into the bucket. If we go down to the bank and we say to the bank, dear bank, we would like to have a loan, and they give us 10 million. That is money going into the bucket. That also means that now we have the money in our house and we can use these money for what purpose ever we would like to use them for. Okay. Then we have money out from this bucket in the company. And what is it that would make money go out of the bucket? Well, quite obviously, when we have here a supplier. When we buy something from our suppliers, they don't give it to us for free. So we have to pay them money to deliver raw materials, whatever we need in order to give us that service or that product. That means when we pay money to suppliers, then it's money out of our bucket. It could also be that we are paying off debt. Remember that we took a loan over here, If we pay off some of our debt, that means that we are taking some of the money in here and give it to the bank that we have borrowed the money from. So cash flow is about when do we have money going in and when do we have money going out. And looking into this, if we have more money going in than we have money going out, then we have a positive cash flow down here in the bucket. We always have enough money. But if we have less money going in than we have money going out, we would have a negative cash flow. And I guess that we can all see that in the long run, we cannot have a company that is having more money going out than money going in. So it is important when we are looking at companies that we are also checking what kind of cash flow does this company have. And when we are looking at an option for a company to choose, let's say market development, does it make sense to follow this option? Will we have more money in than money out if we choose this option? So market development, going to Germany, what might we have? Well, we could receive money. Yes, we receive money from customers. But do we receive money from customers right away? No, we probably don't. Do we need to take a new loan? No, but we might need to finance things from our internal resources, our own money, put it into the option. And then when do we get money back from entering this market in Germany? That is a big question. And therefore, we might have to pay a lot of money up front simply to invest in the specific market development option. We might have to run campaigns. That is money out because we have to pay different media. We might have to hire people. We might have to hire consultants. All of this is money out of the box. Even before we start selling anything and customers start to pay us money. So investing in entering a new market will cost a lot of money. That means we spend a lot of money in the bucket that we have before we start to get money back from all of those customers that we expect to sell our products to. Okay. This also means that the timing has a great influence on cash flow. And let's try to take a closer look at the timing here. Looking at this little arrow down here, I'll try to make a little example illustrating it. We have week 1 in a certain year, and in that year, that week, we place an order with a supplier. Now we are not really caring about entering a new market or anything. We are simply just buying products from a supplier, and we do that in week number 1. Then in week number 4, we receive the raw material that we have ordered with our supplier. Then in week 5, after we have received our material from our supplier, we pay the supplier. That means this is money out. We spent money from our bucket to pay off the supplier because he has delivered raw material to us. Then in the next coming weeks, 4 to 7, we start to produce the product. So we have ordered, we have received, we have paid the supplier, and now we are producing our own product using the raw material from the supplier. Then in week 8, we put the product into our storage unit, and then in week 9 we sell. We sell the product here, and as you can see, we have placed an order, we have received, we have paid the supplier, we produce, we store, we sell, and we still need to have money in from our customers. So when we sell the product, we might sell the product and granting the customer a credit period, and therefore it takes some time before we receive money from our customer. And quite often, companies, when they sell, customers would like to have that they have a credit for between 1 and 3 months, depending on the industry. So it can be quite a long time where we do not get money from our customers, but we may already have paid our supplier. And please notice this little one, produce product. Not only do we have to pay our supplier before we sell and receive money from our customers, we also have to produce it. This means that we spend a lot of money on labor, and we spend money on rent for our buildings. So we have a lot of extra costs going into the production of the product. And our employees, they also expect to get paid maybe every day or every week or every month. And therefore, again, paying salary to these different employees is also money out of our system when we are looking into a specific option. In this case, just a business that is producing. Good. So lots of difference between money out and money in, and in lots of cases we will find ourselves in situations where we need the cash flow to be financed by someone else, and especially if we have options that are quite heavy on investing in the first time of the living period. Okay, so that was cash flow, and now break even. Let's try to take a closer look at break even. To break even, the idea about breaking even is kind of understanding when is it that we are earning enough money so that we can cover our fixed cost. So in reality, it means how many units do we need to sell to cover our fixed cost. Let us go back and remember, what is it that fixed costs are? Well, fixed cost could be rent for the building. It could be if you would produce pizza at home, it could be your stove, that's a fixed cost. And then it might use electricity, that could be a variable cost. But we all have, when we are doing businesses, we do have certain costs that are fixed. That means they're not changing, no matter how many units we are producing. So in your home, if you want to produce pizza, you still need to invest in a stove. Let's say it costs 5,000. You still have that cost, even you don't sell any units, any pizzas at all, then you still have the cost for that stove. So a fixed cost is something that we need to pay without thinking of how many units we are able to sell. So the break-even analysis simply asks the question, how many units, how many pizzas do I need to sell in order for me to have earned enough money to pay my fixed cost? That is the question. And then, of course, if you say your stove can last for 5 years, then you would have to divide the cost of the stove into 5 or with 5, and then you will have a fixed cost of 20% of that cost for the stove for 1 year. Okay. So fixed cost, for example, buildings, machinery, overhead. Overhead could be cost for managers. It can be pretty difficult to say that a manager or CEO, that this person's salary is going directly to produce one specific product. So overhead is everything that we cannot kind of direct to a specific production and the units that we produce. Now, let's try to take a little example. Imagine that we are producing something and we can sell one unit for 150 Danish in the marketplace. So we have a market where we are operating and selling our products, and the market price is 150. Okay. Then we know that this unit that we sell in the market, when we are producing it, we know that it costs altogether 85 Danish to produce it in our factory. And what is it that we know to produce in our factory? It simply means that we know that in order to produce our product, we spend 45 Danish on materials. That could be the raw materials that we bought from our suppliers, because we can directly see that these costs goes to production of one unit. And then we spend 40 Danish on labor cost. And let's imagine just for a minute that a Danish labor has an hourly wage of 160 Danish. That means when we have a cost of 40 Danish labor cost, the calculation is that when we produce one unit, we spend 45 on materials from the supplier, and our employees spend 15 minutes on producing it, and that means we have to pay the employee for his labor in 15 minutes. And since we pay 160 an hour for that labor cost, it turns out that spending 15 minutes is equal to 40 Danish. So these are the variable costs: 45 for materials and 40 in labor cost. So each time we produce one, we have to pay these materials and these labor costs. So these 85 Danish, they have to be deducted from these 150, because we sell for 150, but it cost us 85 to produce it. Let's see the next one here. That means that we earn a profit of 150 minus 85 equals 65 Danish on each unit sold. Okay, let's try to go up here. What were the initial question? How many units do we need to sell to cover our fixed cost? Well, we have calculated and we know that we have fixed cost for 5.5 million. And now we have found out that we earn 65 Danish on each unit. So now it's pretty straightforward to say that the break-even point, defined by how many units we need to sell, is the amount of fixed cost, that was the 5.5 million, and then we divide that with the 65, and that equals 84,616 units. So the break even here, if we have a company with this amount of fixed cost and they can sell at a market price of 150, and we have production cost, the variable cost of 85, that leaves us with this profit here, and then we simply take the fixed cost and divide by how much we earn on one unit, and that leaves us with the number of units that we need to sell in order to cover our fixed cost. Good. That also means that when we look at it in this way, that we could put it up like this and say fixed cost up here divided by the price we receive in the marketplace minus variable cost. And then you could simply write it like this, and there you have your equation. The general equation for break-even is fixed cost divided by price per unit minus cost per unit. So the whole idea is, how many units do we need to sell to cover our fixed cost? Now, having this idea about how many units we have to sell in order to cover our fixed cost, let's try to look at fixed cost. Can we change the fixed cost? Well, could we get cheaper buildings so that the fixed cost might be 4.5 million? And if we still sell at the same price, produce at the same cost, then this would go down, and then this would go down, because we do not have to sell that many units if we only have 4.5 million in fixed cost. So if we can work with our fixed cost and get it down, our break even will also go down. That means we do not need to sell so many units, and therefore we will quite faster get into a position where we can start to earn money. Okay, what happens if the market price, if it suddenly goes up? Then this one will go up. If this stays the same, then we will find that it might be 200 minus 85. That means we earn more per unit. That means we don't have to sell as many units as we did before. And what happens with variable cost? If we can get our materials cheaper from our suppliers, then the cost per unit will go down, and the break-even amount will go down as well. So we need to understand that working with fixed costs can bring the break-even amount down, and the same can a higher price and a lower cost. Also, another thing interesting about break-even, imagine that this has to do with an option of entering the German market, and we had this market development. And if we calculate with this amount of fixed cost to follow that option, and we calculate with this amount of variable cost, then we have to sell, let's just round up and say 85,000 units in the German market. But what if our investigation of the German market has shown us that the whole market consists of 1 million units a year? That means that in order for us just to cover our fixed cost, we would have to have a market share of about 85 or 8.5%. And then we can start to apply that information on a strategic basis and evaluate, does that make sense? Is it at all possible for us to sell that many units in this particular market? So therefore, the break-even is not only about figuring out how many units, but it's also something we can use on a strategic basis to figure out, does it all make sense regarding market share, for example? So that's also quite an important input. Now, this about break-even and numbers, we can try to illustrate it in a graphic way. Up here, we have the same thing, because you will also see this graphic presentation. And we have here our money that's up on the vertical axis, and we have units on the horizontal axis. And then we simply put in our fixed cost right here. That is the same. Remember, no matter how many units we sell, we still have a fixed amount of fixed cost. Okay, then going back and looking into this one, this is the equation of price per unit minus cost. Simply means down here, if we sell 1 unit, then we have earned this amount of money. If we sell 2 units, we have earned this amount of money. If we sell 3 units, we have earned this amount of money. And going back and understanding that we need to figure out when have we sold enough units to cover our fixed cost, then we can see from this line here that the more units we sell, the more profit we make. So the interesting thing is you can use math to calculate this. I'm not going to do the math for you, but if you want to, you can do it. But this is just a simple illustration. Then you can simply calculate this point where we have the 84,606 units. And if you want to do the math, you simply just use the equation up here and put it in. And then you can calculate this, which is the break-even point. So a graphic illustration also, and we had done the numbers. And this means that in order to end this lecture here, before we start looking at something else regarding implementation, we simply have our options here. 1, 2, 3, one could be market development. We simply need to calculate the profit and cash flow outcome of each option. So look into break even, look into profit, and look into cash flow. And cash flow was, do we have enough money to finance this, and do we make enough money over time, or do we need someone to help us financing? And the last thing about cash flow, you probably have heard lots of times that people are going to the stock market in order to sell shares, etc. And what they really do is that they are getting money for their company, and that means they get a lot of cash in by selling shares, and that simply means that they are selling part of their company to investors, and these investors then give them money, and they can use these money to invest in the different strategic options that they have chosen. And that means when they sell shares, it's cash into their bucket, and then they spend this cash to develop the company. And the faster they want to develop, the more money they probably need, and therefore they would have to sell more shares, just as an example. Okay, this ends this lecture on general implementation.